what's going on, fight fans? Hey, this is Coach D, the Wild Man, coming at you again with another episode of Coach D Media. Now, you know I do with Coach D Media. I talk about all things combat sports related, from the highs to the lows. All right, let's go ahead and get back into it. Today, we're going to have a conversation about the UFC and mixed martial arts. Most people who are casual fans who follow UFC, they think MMA is a UFC. So they'll say, hey, do you do UFC? Meaning MMA, right? But they are extremely far apart. UFC is a business. MMA is a sport. The UFC promotes the sport of MMA. They're separate. And you really can't mix the two because they're going to have to start getting further and further apart. Okay? So when you look at the UFC as strictly just a business, right? What's their job? Is to make money, is to make profit, is to be entertaining and sell their brand. Okay? So their brand is more important than any UFC fighter. Okay. And I saw a podcast between Daniel Cormier and freaking Demetrius Johnson on his Mighty podcast. And they were talking about the very thing. You know, how the UFC, why did the UFC start promoting stars? Because some of the stars were getting bigger than the UFC. And they're talking about Chuck Liddell, and, freaking who else? George St. Pierre, what I'm saying, Rich Franklin. They started talking about all the guys who were getting really big names. And they were getting bigger than the UFC. So the UFC had to change all that because the UFC is the brand, not any one fighter. Okay? So that's kind of changed the narrative of why you have to look at the UFC and MMA completely different moving forward. So look at the UFC now. You not only have the UFC as a promotion promoting MMA fights, but now you got the Slap series under the UFC, right? The Contender series under the UFC. They're taking on Jiu-Jitsu under the UFC, and they're taking on boxing. They're trying to get into boxing under the UFC. Okay, so you can no longer say the UFC is about MMA. That's not the case anymore. Okay, so we have to separate the two because it's going to get confusing when you try to develop MMA fighters. You see, and the key thing is developing MMA fighters. So let's break it all down. Okay, so one of the things that stood out in their conversation was Bo Nickal. Okay, Demetrius Johnson asked about why Bo Nickal, for the most part, fumbled the bag, in his rise to being successful. And DC had a very good comeback. He said that Bo Nickal couldn't separate wrestling from fighting. He couldn't separate the two, right? Which means he didn't realize when he should stop wrestling and when he should stop fighting. Okay? And he bought into his hype before he got that lesson, before he knew how to fight as an MMA fighter with wrestling and not the other way around. So he struck when he should have wrestled. He wrestled when he should have, did a takedown. He did a takedown, so he would have stayed standing. He didn't prepare for shots coming from different angles. That's why, guys who were well-rounded in mixed martial arts was able to dominate him in all aspects. I mean, RBD or whatever his name was. Okay, and that's where it ended. His career ended at that part. I'm not saying his career is over, but the hype he was trying to sell himself as, right? He wasn't prepared for it. That's what DC said. He said you can't say you're this guy because then you're gonna get those guys. And when he got those guys and the guys who can really scrap, he wasn't able to deal with them. There you go. You see? So that broke down clearly where MMA can differentiate from the sport of the UFC, the entertainment side of the UFC. If you're not prepared for it, you're gonna come up short. You're gonna derail yourself because the UFC didn't derail Bo. They gave Bo exactly what he was asking for. He wanted to go up in rate. He was calling out Hamza. He was doing all this stuff. All right, they're like, okay, well, we'll give you a guy that's known, that's been around the game, that's been a double champion and one championship. You know what I'm saying? We can get that guy. So what you do with him? And he got dealt with. He got stopped. So you see what I'm saying? You can easily not understand the business of the UFC compared to the sport of mixed martial arts. Okay? So they covered a lot of good things that I thought was very interesting. So they were talking about Daniel Cormier asked DC about why is he remaining so humble. When it comes to him being an 11-1 champion in UFC, which they both said will never be done again. You will never get anybody on 11 fight belt holding win streak, be 11 title defenses outside of John Jones. Okay, so when they talked about that, DC, not DC, DJ was clear. He said, look, when I was doing all of this stuff, I had to fight the bigger guys. Fighting Dominic Cruz, that guy was huge compared to who DJ was. He said Dominic Cruz had too much size on him. When they're both equal, size matters. So when he got down to 125 and everybody was around his size, he was dominant. But he says, hey, you can't fight two equal guys. Can't fight on the same level as one guy is naturally bigger and they both have the same skills. The bigger guy's going to win. So he says, hey, he was kind of hamstrung as what he can do at a true weight of 125. He was honest with it. He said, it don't need to toot my horn that I can fight this guy at 135, knowing that he's coming down from 145, 155. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, when he's talking about how he fought Henry Cejudo, you know what I'm saying, when it came to wrestling and MMA, so he covered so much in him being who he is. But once again, we're talking about the entertainment of the UFC. Dana White just didn't consider Demetrius Johnson a brand, even though he was so successful, right? Dana White didn't consider him a needle mover. And that's going to play a huge factor when you're trying to make bigger money. Even though he was undefeated, even though he was an 11 fight win streak, right? Title defenses, he wasn't going to get pay-per-view buys. He wasn't going to get all this extra money that other champions got, right? Like John Jones and everybody else, because they were bigger fighters. They could fight in different weight classes. They can take things that DJ couldn't do and wouldn't do. Okay, he's not going to be a Conor McGregor, right? He's not going to be a Sean Strickland, right? He's just not going to sell his soul, right, to make ratings. And that's what Dana White wanted. He wanted somebody who was going to sell their soul to make ratings, So it is what it is. Even DC was talking about how good John Jones was for his career. John Jones is the one of the reasons why the biggest buck were made. How much money he said he made fighting John Jones was astronomical compared to everybody else. And it's true. John Jones sold their rivalry, not DC. DC said, I'll just fight you. John Jones was the character that got it done, kind of like Conor McGregor. You need a bad guy. You need a villain, right? To make this entertainment side work. You can't have two guys, selling a fight. It ain't gonna hype. Even though it's gonna be two great fighters, it's not about the fight. It's about the hype, right? That's why they don't care about rankings. That's why it does not matter where you are in the rankings. You could be on a 12, 13, 14, 15 fight win streak, like how Tony Ferguson was. He was on a 11 fight or 12 fight win streak, right? Still wasn't getting title shots. A couple things, injuries and stuff like that against Khabib, but still, right? Other fighters had 12 fight win streaks, weren't getting title shots because it's not about their fighting. It's about the entertainment factor. Can you get the fans on board to buy tickets and pay-per-view? If you can't, you're not going to go up the rank like you want to. Okay? So then they talked about, freaking John Jones and them giving him what he asked for to fight Tom Aspinall. Right? So everybody was talking about, hey, John Jones is, he came up short. He ain't a true champion. He don't want to fight Tom. Do you really think it's that simple? That John Jones just go, hey, give me $30 million, but yeah, I still won't fight the guy. Right? When you get what you ask for, when has John Jones not fought? right? DC said, does John Jones wants to go through the camp to be able to fight Tom Aspinall, right? And like he said, Tom Aspinall is a huge guy. He has a lot of talent and is younger. John Jones is on the other side of that. Why would he want to fight a younger guy, right? And it wasn't a cut and dry. It wasn't like, hey man, we're gonna give you $30 million and that's it. Fight the guy, then you're done. You can go off into this. No, they probably said, look, with $30 million, I want 8 more fights, or I want 5 more fights, or it was something else that John Jones couldn't do. Now you can say it was just because he didn't want to go through the camp, but I don't believe that's true. I believe he didn't want what Dana White wanted on top of that money to get it done. When Dana White puts you on blast and says something, it's because the fighter wasn't going to give Dana White what he wanted, so therefore it ain't going to happen. It ain't always cut and dry like we think it is. Simple as that, right? So that's what I'm saying. You can't buy into the entertainment side of the business because there's a lot more that goes along with it. It's a contract to make the UFC money first and you money second. Period. If you can't make the UFC money, you're not gonna make money. That goes without saying. If you don't get that, you simply don't get it, right? So when it comes down to hype versus fight, there are certain fighters that can deliver the hype, like a John Jones, a Conor McGregor, a Nate Diaz, George Masvidal. There's guys, Kobe Covington. There's guys who can deliver that side of the fight game, the hype side of the fight game, where they can push the needle so high, the story is so great, everybody has to get involved, right? And you don't have to be the best fighter as long as you can sell the fight. That's where the WWE side of it, the TKO promotions, all that stuff comes into it. Is that if you can sell a fight, you can get your shot. Like Paddy the Baddy, right? Paddy the Baddy was able to walk in the cage and daggone be the next fight against Il Tapora. I think it was Il Tapora. Paddy the Baddy wasn't on no kind of run yet to be able to do that, but because he was a hype guy, he was able to step into the cage. I think it was Il Tapora. I gotta look that up. I'm pretty sure it was Il Tapora though. Crazy. Now, granted, he's not fighting Il Tapora. He's fighting the number one contender for Il Tapora. So they cleared that shit up real quick. But on that day, he got the hype. That's the sport. That's the sport. You're not gonna always get what you think you're supposed to get. See what I'm saying? If you can't move the needle, you're going to forget it. So they're saying, I can't remember the guy's name. It's supposed to be number one contender. I have to look at it. My bad on that. I didn't write it down. So now let's get into this to the interesting part of why I decided to do this podcast. Is right. What does it mean to be a mixed martial artist? What does it really mean? Right? Is it how well-rounded you are? Do you know all the skills it takes to be a winner in mixed martial arts? Right? Some people say the foundation of MMA is wrestling, right? But now I'm hearing some say judo may be a more definitive, aspect, right? Look at Ronda Rousey trying to come back to fight Kayla Harrison, for the belt. Basically, two Olympians with judo squaring off. It's a good story, but I don't know. Ronda Rousey's been gone for so long. I don't know if that's a good move, but it could sell tickets. I think. Not sure yet, but maybe. Okay. So, in this particular segment, you had Demetrius Johnson saying that the MMA guru said American wrestling is not the best for the sport, the mixed martial arts in the UFC. He said all the fighters coming from Dagestan and all that kind of good stuff is better because of Sambo. DC versus said, hell no, wrestling is still up there. Then it says Sambo, yeah. Because Sambo is a grappling art with submissions, wrestling, all that goes into a little bit of judo. They put a lot in the Sambo. Okay, that makes it more better suited for mixed martial arts. right? Compared to just pure wrestling by itself, a la, Bo Nickal, right? The reason why DC and Demetrius Johnson were successful because they both came from wrestling. DC had a long amateur career. He had 15 fights as an amateur before he went pro. He had plenty of experience before he went pro, right? DC out of the Olympics went through the MMA gauntlet. He fought at Strikeforce and all the other smaller promotions before he got to the UFC. So he had experience, especially at heavyweight. Okay, so it's not like these guys just jumped from wrestling right into MMA. They went through the system before they got to the UFC. That's why they were so successful. Bo went right from wrestling into the UFC, right? He didn't have but maybe one fight or almost none. I think his first fight may have been in the UFC. I'm not 100% sure. Right, I'm not 100% sure. Or maybe he only had one fight on a local promotion before he went to the UFC. But he didn't have many. He didn't have many. Most of his fights are in the UFC, and he's struggling. So, right, with the MMA guru saying that Sambo and other Dagestan wrestlers can do a better job than American, I kind of get what he says now that I have an international appeal where I've seen fighters from all around the world. I've seen a lot of Kyrgyzstan fighters. I've seen how they get down. They're aggressive across the board. They're very good at their skill set. They're very, very good at their skill set. Even though we're still coming out on top. We won. We took them one, out of Brazil. You know what I'm saying? Ukraine has always been a problem for us. They come heavily, heavily in submission grappling with jiu-jitsu and MMA wrestling, all the kind of good stuff. They're very good. They're very good on the mat. They get us 9 or 10 times. You know what I'm saying? So I'm saying all this to go is the separation of the UFC and MMA is going to be more and more evident down the line. Now with MMA heading towards the Olympics, it could be an Olympic sport. There will be a lot more avenues to where you can just focus on the sport of MMA and take your time before you try to go to the UFC and deal with all the hoopla of what the UFC brings. A lot of stars, they compete in the Olympics before they go to the UFC. Henry Cejudo, Harrison, Dagon Ronda Rousey, freaking DC, all came out of the Olympics. You see? So there's a platform for it. And it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and more defined moving forward with MMA being in the Olympics. So that's why I want to say all this because, there's a lot to break down. There's a lot to go over about how we see the sport. The cars ain't what they used to be. You can't sell a car anymore. Like you usually sell a whole car. You can't. You got to sell a couple of fights and hope people decide to buy it. Your prices are going up. Talent is not where it used to be. There's no male belt holders in the UFC. There's females, but there ain't no males. John Jones has lost the belt, so he was the last one. There is no American belt holders as males in the UFC. Chew on that. Chew on that. That's another story that I'm going to go to next. So it is what it is. So this is Coach D doing what I'm doing, calling it like I see it, talking my share of shit. To hear from me again, peace out.